All right, let me try back here, share. All right, sorry about that.
Right.
Okay, let's see, this is my problem. I can't make it move. Ah, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna have three sections in this talk. The first is gonna talk about the issues for the election. The second is going to talk a little about who's going to win. And the third is the Catholic vote and does it matter? So that just gives you a kind of a roadmap of where I'm going right now. I think if we take a look at today's scripture readings, we can see some priorities in terms of issues. The first reading says, the Lord says, you shall not molest or oppress an alien, which is, of course, a migrant, because you were once aliens yourselves in the lands of Egypt. And you shall, take care of the widows and the orphans. And then in the gospel, the great commandment to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. So I think as we approach an election, if we're talking about issues, I think we can get them right out of the scripture of the things that we as Catholics should be concerned about. I find it fascinating that these scripture readings come up every 2 years right before an election. Somebody who was designing the liturgy readings must have either had a sense of humor or actually knew what they were doing. So anyway, that's something to think about in terms of the issues that are important. For Catholics, of course, we always talk about Catholic social teaching as being something that should guide us in our voting and in our political participation, not just voting, but any kind of participation in American politics. The bishops have made their own concerns quite evident. Back in November, a year ago, they said that the threat of abortion is the preeminent priority for them. At the same time, however, they say that Catholics are not single issue voters. Now, I'm not quite sure how those two thoughts connect to one another, but in any case, the bishops are saying both of those things. And of course, conservatives, Republicans will quote the first, and Democrats and progressives will quote the second. But in any case, the bishops say both of these things, and it's up to you to figure out how that all makes sense. The bishops very clearly in their document, Faithful Citizenship, say that a Catholic cannot vote for a candidate who favors a policy. I can't even read this because I have these screen. Oh, here, let me push that. All right, now I can read it. Who favors a policy promoting an intrinsic evil act, such as abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, deliberately subjecting workers or the poor to subhuman living conditions, redefining marriage in ways that violate its essential meaning, or racist behavior. So all of those things, the bishops say, are intrinsic evils, and a Catholic cannot vote for a candidate who does that, which leads me to believe that you really can't vote for anybody. So that's a big problem. But what's very important in this sentence is that if clause. If the voter's intent is to support that position. Intention is a very important thing to consider when in Catholic moral teaching. What is the intention of the person doing the act of voting or whatever act it is? So if the voter's intention is to support these positions, whether it's abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, subjecting workers or the poor to subhuman conditions, redefining marriage, or racist behavior, if that's your intention, then you're in trouble, according to the bishops. So, but it has to, that if clause is an absolutely essential part of that sentence. Now, the bishops go on to say, in faithful citizenship, there may be times when a Catholic who rejects a candidate's unacceptable position, even on policies promoting an intrinsic evil act, may reasonably decide to vote for that candidate for other morally grave reasons. So, if, you know, for example, if you believe that Trump is subjecting workers to, or the poor to subhuman living conditions, or children at the border, or that he's promoting racist behavior, you can still vote for him if your intention is not to support those positions. At the same time, if you know that Biden is pro-choice, you can still vote for him if you have other morally grave reasons for doing so. So I think this language can actually let both sides off the hook in terms of voting. But you have to have other morally grave reasons for doing it. It can't just be because, well, he's my party, therefore I'm going to support him. No, from the Catholic tradition, you have to have morally grave reasons for doing it. So when people say you can't vote for a certain candidate, you know, they're not telling you the whole truth in terms of what the bishops teach. The bishops teach that it very much depends on why you were voting for that person. And it also depends on whether you have other morally grave reasons for voting for a candidate who may be, in fact, supporting something that the bishops consider intrinsically evil. So this is important, I think, because there's a lot of false information out there about who Catholics can and cannot vote for, and who the bishops can and cannot, are saying you can or cannot vote for. Okay. Where, in fact, are Catholics? Well, in fact, more than half of Catholics favor legalized abortion. You see it down there at Catholics. 56% of Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. The ones who are most opposed to abortion, of course, are white evangelicals. But you can see here that no matter what the bishops are saying, Catholics are thinking, at least more than half of Catholics are thinking something else. The reality is that Catholics are much more motivated by their partisan views than they are by either the bishop's teaching or Catholic social teaching. As you can see here in this graph, 77% of Catholic Democrats believe that abortion should be legal in most cases. They also believe 91% of Catholic Democrats believe that we should not expand the wall at the US border with Mexico. So here they disagree with the bishops on abortion. They agree with the bishops on the wall. Republican Catholics, on the other hand, 63% of them say abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. So they agree with the bishops there, but 81% of them favor expanding the wall along the US border with Mexico, where, of course, they disagree with the bishops. I think this graph tells us that Catholics are more motivated by their partisan views than by what the bishops say or what Catholic social teaching might say. What do Catholics think about the church in terms of its involvement in politics? 62%, almost just under 2/3 of Catholics say that U.S. churches should keep out of politics. 37% say that churches should express their views on day-to-day social and political matters, on the issues. But 76% say churches should not endorse candidates seeking elected office. So for the most part, Catholics want to see the church stay out of politics. They're not waiting for the bishops to tell them how to vote. In fact, they don't want the bishops to tell them how to vote. What are the top issues in the United States today coming into the election? It depends on which survey you look at. Here's the Pew survey, and it's the economy, stupid, is 79%. Then it's followed by healthcare, Supreme Court appointments, the coronavirus, and then other issues that Americans are interested in. Another survey done by the Public Religion Research Institute has a number of other issues. For them, the top issue comes out as the coronavirus. And then the fairness of the presidential election. People seem to be worried about whether we're going to have a fair election or not. And the other issue is healthcare and jobs and unemployment. Those are the issues that get more than half of the public excited and concerned. Other issues are lower down, including racial inequality and climate change, down at 43%. Even lower than that are abortion and immigration, where it's about 1/3 of people think that those are really the important issues. When you break this down by religion, what we see here, white Catholics there are right in the middle. Healthcare for them is the top issue, followed by, actually they're tied with the pandemic, and closely followed by fairness for the presidential election. Hispanic Catholics, the coronavirus is top, and of course the coronavirus is touching the Hispanic and Black community very, very much. And fairness of the presidential election, they're worried about that, and jobs and unemployment. So you see different religious groups have somewhat different issues, but you see the coronavirus is way up there of one of the top concerns, except for white evangelicals. They're the only group for whom abortion is the top issue. So you can see that, some people have different views on what's the most important issues facing the country. Next, who's going to win? Well, the best source for information on projecting who's going to win is the 538 website. And they are saying that Trump has only a 13% chance of winning. Now, that's just a little bit better than throwing a 7 with a pair of dice, which is 16% chance of throwing a 7 with a pair of dice. 13% chance of winning, that sounds pretty good for the Democrats, On the other hand, would you get on an airplane that had a 13% chance of crashing? We don't, that's what they are projecting. They believe that Biden will get 53% of the vote, Trump will only get 45% of the vote, and that Biden will get 345 electoral votes and Trump will get 193 electoral votes. Now, of course, your response to this is, yeah, didn't they say that back in 2016? Well, what you have to understand about 2016 is that, in fact, Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. The polls, the national polls, were in fact pretty much on target. They only underestimated Trump's vote by 1 to 2 percentage points, which actually makes them more accurate than they were in 2012. The difference, of course, was the Electoral College. 77,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin gave the election to Trump. So in the United States, what matters is not just the popular vote, it's also the electoral vote. So it's going to be very important how different states win. 538 gave Trump a 29% chance of winning in 2016. They were one of the only ones that gave Trump that high of a chance of winning. Most predictors gave Trump a 0 chance of winning in 2016. So this same group that gave Trump a 29% chance of winning in 2016 is giving him only a 13% chance of winning this year. What are the key states? The key states, again, I'm using the same source, are these that are listed here. Georgia is a 50-50. It's a toss-up. Who's going to win that? Iowa, 51% chance that Trump will win. This is not how the vote will turn out. This is their chance of winning. The odds on them winning according to this model. You see here that it's going to be extremely important what happens in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which are all being predicted for Biden at this point. If Trump loses Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, it's all over. And of course, if he wins Texas, it would be a rout. These are the states that we're going to have to watch on election night. Of course, the trouble is Pennsylvania, they're not allowed to count absentee ballots until the election is over. So Pennsylvania is going to be very slow in getting the results out. It may take a day or two. Florida, on the other hand, we should be getting results from there. And if Trump does lose Florida, I think it's all over for him. Now, the other number here on the right is the percentage of that state's population which is Catholic. So you see in the last 4 states on my list, over 20% of the population is Catholic. And so they're going to play an important role. In Arizona and Florida, of course, it's heavily Hispanic. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, it's mostly white Catholics that are going to be important. Now, Catholics are the preeminent swing voters. In 2016, Trump got 52% of the Catholic vote. Obama got 50% in 2012, 54% in 2008. George Bush got 56%. Gore got 50%. you see how the Catholic vote is split almost evenly between the Republican and Democratic candidates, and almost always goes for the winner. In 2000, it went for Gore. Depending on which poll you look at. Some of these races in terms of the Catholics were so close that some polls showed Catholics voting for a majority for one candidate, and other polls showed Catholics voting a majority for another candidate. But you can see how important Catholics are as swing voters. It's a very small percentage of Catholics that change their mind every election, but they are important in terms of determining who actually gets elected. This year, they're projecting that Biden will get 51% of the Catholic vote. Catholics have long been divided between Republicans and Democrats, and we're quite unusual in this way. Most religious groups are overwhelmingly committed to one party or another. Most Jews and Black Protestants vote Democratic. Most white evangelicals vote Republican. Hispanic Catholics vote overwhelmingly Democrat. Hispanic evangelicals tend to vote Republican. But you see, the Republican the party ID of Catholics is so evenly divided since 1994, at least, as is shown in this particular chart. And as I say, the difference between white Catholics and Hispanic Catholics is quite significant, especially since 2010. We've seen white Catholics become more and more Republican. Hispanic Catholics, we only have numbers for them since 2002, as you can see, but they have tended to be more Democratic than Republican. The Republican Hispanic Catholics tend to be Cuban in Florida, who tend to be more Republican, but Mexican American Catholics tend to be heavily Democratic, as do Puerto Rican Catholics. So with this coming election, we see that white Christians are really heavily towards Trump. 78% of white evangelical Protestants it looks like they're going to vote for Trump. On the other hand, white Catholics and white mainline Protestants are more evenly divided. They're still giving a majority to Trump, but not as much as they have in the past, and certainly not as much as white evangelical Protestants are. On the other hand, the other groups you see overwhelmingly going for Biden. The so-called nuns, 62% of them are voting for Biden. Jews, 70%, Hispanic Catholics, 67%, atheists and agnostics, 83%, Black Protestants, 90%. So you see how this is headed towards with white Christians, for the most part, voting for Trump, and everybody else voting for Biden. So that's the way we see the election going so far. I think these numbers are pretty good, considering the fact that we're almost at the end of the election, and so many, it's over 50 million people have already voted. So whether there's an October surprise or not, or some crazy thing happens between now and the election, those people can't change their vote. They've already voted. So projections are that we're going to have a huge turnout despite COVID-19. People are really motivated to come out and vote either one way or the other. People have very strong views about Trump. He seems to be, it really seems to be a referendum on him. People who love him are going to come out to vote for him. People who don't like him are going to come out and vote against him. And how Catholics end up voting could, in fact, determine the election in some of these key states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida. So thank you very much. I don't know how you want to handle questions, but I'll throw that to our host.
I see a few questions in the chat box, Father Reese.
Oh, great.
There's one that's just written to me, so I'll read that one to you and see what you say on that one. What percentage of Catholics are Democrat overall and by key states?
I don't have it by key states, but as you could see from, that question was probably thrown in before I gave that graph that showed it's almost, Catholics are almost split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. Of course, white Catholics are more Democratic and Hispanic Catholics are more, wait a minute, I had that backwards, sorry. White Catholics are more Republican and Hispanic Catholics are more Democratic. We are pretty closely split 50-50, which, you know, is a real challenge to us as a church, because I think we have an obligation to model to the rest of the country about how people can civilly discuss politics with one another. You know, I think this is both, you know, a challenge and an opportunity, because I would really like to see us somehow come together to talk about issues, to talk about our country, to talk about how we can work together for the common good, because we see our country so divided. It's become, you know, partisanship has become so toxic. And the very fact that we are split 50-50, it seems to me, puts an extra responsibility on us as a church to figure out a way to have a conversation, to have a dialogue, to have civil discourse in this area, and to model it for the rest of the country.
Another question is on Hispanic Catholics, wondering how much influence the country from which they may have immigrated, if they're a first generation, influences their alignment, i.e. if they're coming from a country like Venezuela or Cuba, are they leaning Republican because they're concerned about socialism?
Yes, that's a really good question. You know, we think that, you know, anybody who thinks Hispanics are homogeneous has never, you know, met a large group of them. Cuban Catholics are very, very different from Mexican-American Catholics. Cuban Catholics are much more concerned about communism, their whole experience of oppression in Cuba, the stories they heard from their parents and grandparents as they sat around the dinner table in Florida has made them very suspicious of anybody who wants to open things towards Cuba, even the Pope. And so this has tended to make the Cubans much more open to the Republican Party, which has, you know, always talked so strongly about being anti-communist, et cetera, and anti-Castro. So this is very true of the Cubans. Now, frankly, how do I say this politely? Cubans came in a while back, and just like the Irish and the Poles and all the other immigrants, once they get in the door, they're inclined to want to slam the door behind them and not let anybody else in. I mean, this is the scripture reading today is speaking to all of us whose grandparents or great-great-grandparents or whatever were in fact immigrants. We too once were we're strangers in a strange land, or in Egypt. The Lord is speaking to the Jews and saying, okay, the aliens, the immigrants in your country, treat them well, because you too were once like them, when you were in Egypt. Well, the Irish, the Poles, the Germans, the Cubans, they'll have to listen to this scripture reading and realize, hey, when there are people who are refugees being persecuted in Syria, even Christians, are being banned from the United States, who would like to flee for their lives from places like Syria and Afghanistan, and come to the United States. No, we've closed the door to these folks. And so the scripture reading we had this morning is a real challenge to us, to everybody who wants to close the door behind us. But your point about Venezuela also in Colombia are important, also in Cuba, in Florida, because they also, this concern about socialism is the kind of concern, a language that they really relate to, because many of them fled their countries because of a concern about socialism. Maybe their property was confiscated, whatever it was. Their personal experience comes with them when they come to the United States. So when someone accuses the Democratic Party of being socialist, this is something they're willing to listen to, whether it's true or not. I just heard on NPR recently that, in fact, there are people who are putting up fake news in Colombia and Venezuela, Colombia especially, because they know it will be retweeted to people living in Florida. And there's some concern about foreign actors doing this in these countries. They don't even have to do it in the United States. They can do it in these countries, and then their relatives and friends will tweet it and share it with them here in the United States. So yes, this is extremely important. So it's important to realize that Hispanics are not a homogeneous group. Many of these immigrant groups that do, that come over and start small businesses also tend to be more sympathetic to the Republicans because they don't like government regulation. They don't like the government telling them what they can and can't do in their business. I mean, this is just a natural thing. Anybody who runs a small business or is a CEO, they always hate the government coming in and telling them what they can and cannot do. So these are the kinds of things that tend to get some of these immigrant groups to think more Republican, despite the rhetoric against immigrants that we hear coming out of the White House.
Father Reese, we're piling up questions here in the chat box.
I'll answer shorter.
A couple of interesting ones is, what do you see as necessary element for those civil conversations, proposed discussions? I'll give you three of them, and then you can decide which order you want to answer them. So that's an interesting one. Then why don't the bishops of the USA bring up the idea you mentioned at the beginning of looking at more than just the abortion issue? And what do you think of the Pope's recent comments on gay unions will have any impact on the vote?
That's all over the ballpark. I'll answer the second one first. Go ask a bishop. Don't ask me why they're put a priority on abortion. The first one, what would be a good way of proceeding? The Jesuit Conference, which is based here in Washington, D.C., just put out I forget the exact title. It's an Ignatian guidebook for discernment for political action, something like that. What it tries to do is bring the Ignatian values, Ignatian discernment, the spiritual exercises, in a sense, to the question of how do we respond to political issues. I would encourage any parish that wanted to get involved in something like that, or any individual, to take a look at that document. I really think it's fine. I did a column on it, if you want the Cliff Notes version of it. But yeah, I think that would be, you start with prayer. When you pray together with people, it's a little harder to hate them. So you should start with prayer, praying for each other. And, the other thing that they talk about is what Ignatius talks about, when you're seeking the will of God, before in order to find the will of God, you have to start by being indifferent. You have to set aside your own views. You have to be open to listen to other people. You have to truly want the will of God, and you want to, search for it, and you want to provide a space where people are free to express their views and to share and listen. Anyway, this document, I think, has a lot of good suggestions on how to structure some kind of a discussion that would be helpful in bridging this kind of toxic environment that we have. Now, I think you had the civil unions. I just did a column on civil unions, which you can find at religionnews.com on the civil unions. Very briefly, the first point is, this is nothing new. Pope Francis was in favor of this when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, before he became Pope. But what people don't realize is that for him, it was an alternative to gay marriage. So in fact, in the United States, this would be a step backwards for the gay community. At least that's the way they would perceive it, as a step backwards. I think, those of you who are old enough, like me, remember that in California, there was some discussion of having civil unions before gay marriage blew onto the scene and, was basically put in by court decisions. So, we're way past civil unions. But, so this is really, in a sense, irrelevant in the United States. But in the global South, this is a matter of life and death. I mean, in some countries in Africa, you can be executed for being gay or having gay sex. So, the thought of civil unions in Africa is revolutionary, both politically and culturally. If the Pope is going to get any pushback on this, I think it's going to be from African bishops who really don't want to go there because they know their people are not in favor of it. In my column, I have a map that was created by the Pew Research Center that shows the percentage of people around the world who are in support of, sympathetic towards gay rights. And in Africa, it ain't there. So this is extremely important in the global South but pretty much irrelevant in the United States. Now, it is relevant, however, for the Catholic Church in the United States. The bishops have gone crazy in terms of some of these court cases fighting, fringe benefits for gay couples, or firing people who work for Catholic institutions because they get married. The Pope is saying they have a right to a family. So can we, as a church, fire people at high school who get married now, after the Pope has said they have a right to this, to a family? I don't think so. And do we have a right to say we're not going to give spousal benefits to gay spouses? If they have a right to a family, they have a right to a family. And right now, in fact, I think it's November 4th, there's a case that will be heard at the US Supreme Court where the Archdiocese of Philadelphia is challenging the city of Philadelphia. The Archdiocese has a foster care program, and it says that it will not foster kids with gay married couples. Well, why not now? I mean, when the Pope says they have a right to a family, now we Catholics usually, when we say family, we usually mean, yeah, kids are part of a family. So, if, and the city of Philadelphia is saying, well, if you're not going to sponsor kids with gay couples, then you're not going to get any money from us for your program. You can have your program, but we're not going to give you any money for it. And they're suing and say, no, you have to give it to us because this is an issue of freedom of religion. Well, if the Catholic Church can now say, okay, we'll sponsor kids with gay couples, then this court case is totally moot. And the bishops, I think, the bishops have a couple of weeks, to decide, should they withdraw from this case that is right now before the US Supreme Court. My guess is they don't know what to do, but I believe that they should. So it's on the one hand, this is not big news in the United States. On the other hand, the church's attitude towards gay couples now, what should it be? Should it change? Now that the Pope has said this. I think it should. Now, the bishops are probably going to try and weasel out of it by saying, well, he said civil unions, these are marriages. Therefore, we can continue to discriminate. Well, I think that's stupid, but they may do that.
Roberta, please unmute yourself and ask your question. You have to unmute, Roberta. Roberta, we can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Can you unmute her?
Let me see. I've asked her to unmute. Roberta, we can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Where is she?
While we're waiting for Roberta, just to note that Robert has put in a link to the Ignatian Guide for Civic Engagement that Father Reese mentioned.
Oh, terrific. Thanks.
Roberta, can you unmute and ask your question? We couldn't hear you. She's not able to unmute. It's not working. Sorry. If you want to type your question into the chat, Roberta, we'll come back to it. It's not working. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? If you do, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I have a question. Tom, on the Catholic vote, there's a lot of evidence, which is not about religion, but about people over 65 because of the pandemic who voted Republican are going to now vote Democratic, about white suburban women, etc. And so is there any way to connect that with our understanding of how Catholics are doing that? I mean, so it may be that more Catholics are going to split from what they were before the white Catholics as Republicans, because many of these people over 65 or women in the suburbs used to vote Republican. So it's a question of the religious relation to that seems to be a big thing in Biden's favor, those two.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that the COVID epidemic is having a really large impact on elderly people, including, of course, white Catholic elderly people, because when it sounds like the White House wants to open up the economy and it's okay if the old folks die because we don't need them for the economy anyway, that's not a way to win a vote. So that, did not go over well with elderly people. Not only that, elderly people want to hug their grandchildren and they can't. They're really upset by how this epidemic has progressed. So there's a lot of concern among elderly people, and I think that very much includes elderly Catholics. The women in the suburbs is clearly important. They're very much turned off by Trump's character, by his language, his style. I think they're getting sick and tired of him. And some of them won't tell their husbands that they're going to vote for Biden because their husbands are still voting for Trump. So I think that's going to be an important thing. Now, frankly, I'm a little confused about the women's vote because Bill Galston, who's a really superb political scientist at Brookings, says that this is all a myth, that in fact, women are voting for Biden at the same rates that they voted for Clinton, which probably isn't surprising. Clinton was a woman, and that it's actually men who are changing over to vote for Biden and making the real difference there, which isn't surprising. Men are sexist, so they wouldn't vote for a woman, but now they finally got a guy who looks like them that they can vote for, and that's has the same background and upbringing as they do. So I think there's a lot of men who wouldn't vote for a woman who will now vote for a man. So frankly, I think that's part of the dynamic here also.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have one.
Hi, Shirley.
Hi, Tom. Are you going to be having any other talks this year?
Not that I know of. This is the first time I've given one of these talks on a Zoom like this. So if I do, I'll let John know, and he can maybe share it with you folks. But I don't have any planned so far.
Well, it's always wonderful to hear you, and I wish that we could hear you more often.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet.
Well, Tom, I'm actually going to be pretty soon trying to organize the spring adult faith formation, so I may get back to you again for a time to talk.
Oh, terrific. Sure.
We'll probably still be on Zoom by you know,
I'm afraid we will.
yeah.
I see a good question here in the chat. Is Catholic discernment, how much should be perceived character of the politician weigh in?
Could you repeat that?
In Catholic discernment, how much should perceived character of the politician weigh in?
Okay, gotcha. Well, I mean, that's always a judgment call, I think. How do you weigh a person's character versus their policies? Actually, the traditional Catholic position was we were much more interested in a person's policy than their sex life, and how they live their lives. I mean, we were very Italian that way, or European. I don't know what the proper comparison is, but we had all sorts of politicians and kings and nobles that had their mistresses, but did good things, and we liked them. The evangelicals, on the other hand, were always very, very strong about character. So for, especially during the Clinton administration, the evangelicals said, how can you support a man like Bill Clinton who can't keep his pants on? They suddenly changed their minds when Trump became president. Character no longer, they became much more Catholic in their approach to this particular character value. Now, of course, it also depends what you mean by character. Is that just limited to their sex lives? Or are we talking about their honesty? Are we talking about their threat to democracy? Are we talking about their commitment to the poor, their values, their orientation? It depends what you mean by character. There are political virtues, I would guess. How are they? Do they try and pull people into the conversation? Do they try and build consensus, or are they dividers? Do they make enemies lists? Do they stir up controversy? So, I mean, so character can matter. I would, their personal character, I wouldn't be so concerned about. On the other hand, remember Reagan was the first president we ever elected because he was divorced. And that was quite revolutionary. When Nelson Rockefeller tried to run for president, and he was divorced. We can't have a divorced president. But once a conservative divorced candidate ran, of course, people's values changed. So we're kind of hypocritical when it comes to some of these things. As long as it's our candidate, we will wink at his picadillos. But if it's somebody else's candidate, we will get outraged. We are shocked. There is gambling going on here, this is, it's sad, but this is the way it is. But if I had to make a judgment, the personal virtues are less important than the political virtues in character. But that's just my opinion. I mean, everybody's got to make their own judgment.
I have two more questions for you on the chat. One is, would you like to tell us your thoughts on Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, and particularly how it might affect the perception of Catholics in the US? And the other question is, can you speak to national trends and the direction of the Republican Party under Trump and McConnell?
Okay, first, Amy, what a wonderful woman. I mean, she's a super mom. I don't know, and God bless aunts. They've got an aunt in the house who helps in taking care of the kids. It would be absolutely impossible for them to do it without her. But she's an extraordinary woman, very bright, very smart. I mean, you know, adopts 2 kids from Haiti. I mean, you know, this is clearly a very admirable person and woman.
I have to add to the question, because the second person asked a similar question, which I think you could address at the same time, which is, will a radically conservative Catholic Supreme Court damage the church's reputation with the American public, especially if they eliminate the ACA and curb Medicare coverage? Does this run the risk of a Catholic backlash?
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I say she's a wonderful person. That doesn't mean you necessarily want to put her on the Supreme Court. There are a lot of wonderful people viewing this this talk right now. I'm not sure I would want to nominate any of you for the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's not just the person's personal life, again, character, that we're worried about. It's, you know, it's her judicial values, it's her judicial judgments, it's where she will take the court in terms of its decisions. Now, if you look at the Supreme Court, it's got a lot of Catholics. You know, I remember the days when there was 1 Catholic seat on the Supreme Court and 1 Jewish seat on the Supreme Court. Now we have all these, I forget, is it 5 Catholics we have on the Supreme Court? I think we now have a majority. But they're all over the place in terms of their views. You know, so we have liberal democratic Catholics on the court. We have conservative Catholics on the court. You know, and whether you think Roberts is a moderate conservative or you know, he's certainly not a liberal, but whatever you think, you know, now he's kind of in the middle of the court, whereas in the past we would have considered him on the right. But in any case, there's a whole spectrum of Catholic views on the court. So I'm not sure we're going to get blamed for anything that the court decides. I think Mitch McConnell is the guy who's going to, and Trump are the ones who are going to take responsibility for what's on the court, because they were able to get 3 appointees in and keep Obama from getting his 1 additional Supreme Court judge. So I'm not sure that Catholics are going to be blamed. I don't think people. I think the religion of the court justices is pretty irrelevant. Again, you know, the conservative ones may support what the bishops say about religious freedom and abortion, but they certainly are not supporting what the bishops are saying about immigrants and refugees and things like that. So there's no, you know, they're not a united party, not a united group. And your second question, I've forgotten already.
Amy Coney Barrett. I've forgotten it too, but I see another one that I want to put out there. So
okay, go ahead.
We'll
remember the one later.
What do you know about the People of Praise group? Is there a covenant requirement that makes a woman pledge to be subservient to men?
Yeah. I don't know very much about them at all. They're a charismatic group. They're more, my impression is they're more about community. These charismatic groups are highly dependent on who the leader is. There are some that are very authoritarian, very paternalistic. There are others that are much more communal. I mean, they remind me of Mormons in a way. But, you know, to think that that Amy Barrett is going to take orders from her husband about how she's going to vote on the Supreme Court, I think is the most bizarre idea I have ever heard. I mean, he seems to be a very nice guy, very supportive of her and her work, and does the cooking and everything else. I mean, if I had a daughter, I'd be really happy to have a husband like that for my daughter. So I think that I think that is all blown out of proportion, which doesn't mean I would support her for the Supreme Court, but that's another issue.
The other question was about if you could speak to the national trends and the direction of the Republican Party under Trump and McConnell.
Well, Trump has really disrupted normal politics. I mean, the Republicans used to be a party of principle. They were for globalization. And now because of Trump, they're into trade wars. They used to be for balanced budgets. Trump doesn't care about balancing the budget at all. They used to be, a party of the white middle class of the suburbs. And now, I mean, he has kind of chased out the college educated white middle class that used to vote Republican because they didn't like taxes. Now they're voting Democrat because they don't like Trump. And yet he has stolen the white working class folks, the blue collar workers, from the Democratic Party, which used to be the backbone of the Democratic Party. I mean, it's like you threw all the chips on all the cards on the table and picked them up randomly. The party allegiances are so different today than they were 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, this has been a huge shakeup in American politics. The question is, will it survive Trump? If he gets reelected, could very well survive. If he gets defeated, my guess is that Republicans will continue to pay lip service to their wonderful leader, Trump, but then will vote the way they want and do what they want. But the problem is the primaries are controlled by Trumpyites. This is why all the congressmen salute whenever Trump says anything. They know that they can be attacked on the right in a primary and they can lose. If they are not 100% for Trump, they're in trouble by somebody who's going to run against them and say, I'm 120% for Trump. So it's become a party of one person, and who can change his mind on policies day by day. I mean, we still don't know what he wants in terms of a stimulus package. Does he want a small one, a big one? He's really caused problems for the old-time Republicans because he's such unpredictable and so contrary to where the Republicans have been in the past. I think if he's defeated, we may see the Republicans try and regroup, but they're going to have to pretend to still be Trumpites because those folks are not going to go away. They've been in the Republican Party since the Tea Party. And of course, now that they're very strong in the South, there's a real racial aspect to the Republican Party in the old South. So it's going to be hard to get the Republican Party ever looking like something that people like Romney or other Republicans would feel comfortable in.
Thank you so much. I see that we are now,
Are we-
right past our usual
We're past time.
but I think people have really enjoyed hearing you. And actually, there's a question that, will you come back after the election? So I'm going to let Father Coleman work on you for that. And
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed the questions.
thank you
and
so much for
thank you
sharing
for
your
all tuning in.
time with us and your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. It's really been a gift.
Just a quick
Okay.
question, Lucy, if I may, Tom. When are we going to catch you out here on the West Coast?
John Coleman said I'll probably be back in spring, so we'll see.
We
But
look forward to it.
physically, I don't know. We're not really allowed to travel. And if I came to the West Coast, I'd have to be quarantined for 2 weeks before I could talk to my brother.
Oh, my God.
And then when I returned, I'd have to be quarantined for another 2 weeks.
Oh, no, that's too much. Too much.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Our tradition here on Zoom Hospitality is to close with saying the Our Father, and we unmute ourselves and we allow the cacophony of all our different voices to come together, and we put out our hands. So if people would be willing to unmute themselves and reach out their hands, we will conclude with the Our Father. Our Father.
Father art in heaven, thy name be
Come
done
on earth as it is in heaven. Pay our daily bread, our trespasses. Forgive those who trespass against us. It's not to for us from evil. Amen.
Sounded like Pentecost.
The power and the glory, now and forever.
Thine is the
Amen.
kingdom, the power, and the glory. Amen.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Stay safe.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mary.
Bye.
Thank
Well
you.
done, Mary.
Great job.
Thank you.
Excellent.